Dagda August Falcha. Hi, hello, it's Jon O'Sullivan from the Irish Pagan School, and I'm answering one of the questions that I was asked in our YouTube comments today, and it is to kind of share the story of the Dagda's Club. So if you have been following along, we're doing a bit of a series where myself and my partner Laura O'Brien are trying to challenge ourselves as content creators, turn up regularly in the YouTube and kind of provide some insight to our school, to the Irish mythology, to our practices as Irish pagans, to kind of our lived experience as a daily devotee of the ancient gods of Ireland. And so the god that I work for is called An Dagda, which is well, it kind of translates as the good god, but he's not morally good. It's not like, good and evil in any way, shape. A form. The actual translation of the words is Dagda is good at everything. And so I touched on that in a previous kind of video where I talked about how I met the Dagda and how he got the name. So it was during the run-up to the second battle of Moytura, where all of these very powerful people kind of promise what they're going to do to aid in the upcoming invasion from the Fomorian enemies. And all these powerful people are like, oh yeah, I'm going to do this. They're going to call upon the mountains of Ireland, call upon the rivers of Ireland, call upon like fire to rain down from the sky, call upon, the powers of Druidry to ensure that every breath that I actually love this part in the lines because it's such a fascinating one. The Druids promise that every breath that the Fomorians will take would diminish them, even if the battle were to last for 7 years. And every breath that the Tuatha Dé Danann would take would instill vigor and valor in them, even if the battle were to last 7 years. So it's the idea that, as you continue, each breath that you take for your cause, for your purpose, is actually, if you're doing it wrong or if you're on the wrong side, diminishing you and like counting you down in essence. Whereas if you're doing the right things, if you're kind of in right relationship with your tribe, with your Tua, then every breath only makes you better, only kind of takes you further along your path to becoming more powerful and more useful in your right cause, So I absolutely love that part in the lore. It's a fascinating part, which is why I love to read these stories and kind of study into them and kind of try and bend my brain around them. Because the language is from ancient Irish, Old Irish, which isn't taught anymore. And there's very few people who can actually translate it. And then there's multiple different ways to translate some of the words. And then there's the euphemistic kind of cultural awareness of the words that can often be lost or can often be mistranslated in some way, which then, of course, if you get one word wrong in a translation, it can shift the entire perspective of the tale and of the story. So, you're wondering why I have not started talking about the Dagda's Club, but I wanted to make it clear that the translations itself, the wording of these stories is so crucially important. Because it was part of an oral tradition. There wasn't written language apart from Om, made by the god Oma, if you saw the video on Oma. But that language was not for regular consumption or regular kind of use. It was for the higher intellectuals to be able to mark things and document things in certain ways. So it wasn't, you write down every story at Om. Wouldn't be practical, to be honest, if you know anything about Om. We teach classes on Om over at the Irish Pagan School. There's an annual Om course, which deep dives into the ancient language itself and the spiritual connotations and practices that go with that language. But John, you should get back on point. You're talking about a club, or is it a staff? And so that's the other kind of thing with this language translation. The words that we have is on Lorog More. So the word Lorog is the word for staff or club, and more is the word for big. So that's where we get this. It's this big club or big staff. But there are other translations of the words, which I will get to towards the end. So I need to tell you the story then. I need to kind of bring you along and talk to you about the Dagda's Club and where and how he came upon this power. Before I do it, you're probably wondering what I'm holding. This is a beautiful piece of oak It was from an oak post that fell half into a bog and half out. And so you see the way the coloration on the wood. Oh, by the way, for anyone who has visual impairment, I am holding a length of wood. It is about 5 foot tall. One end is roughly hewn from the shapes of striations of the wood, and then it was carved and worked by a woodworker who had a real challenge with it, because part of it is turned to bog oak. And for anyone who doesn't know, when oak kind of goes into some of the bogs in Ireland, the acidity of the water there actually changes the chemical composition of the wood, and it becomes this really hardened, dark black kind of coloration, which is it's almost in a form of petrification in some ways, because it becomes so hard, so dense. So this piece of oak that I'm holding is half in. It was half in, half out. Which, if you know anything about liminality or practices, it makes it very, very interesting energetically to work with. It used to belong to someone else who left the country and left it in holding or in keeping with someone. And that person kind of held on to it, never worked with it, never engaged with it. And I was around it for many years, but never touched it, because it was that kind of like, well, that's obviously nothing got to do with me. Or, as much as I find it fascinating, I like, it's someone else's stuff. So you don't just rock into someone else's house and start picking up their spiritual implements. Okay. If you saw my last video about sensible and spiritual sensitivity, I talked about consent. When people set up energetic workings in their house, practices or altar spaces or whatever, it's really detrimental to just walk in and just touch something, because you don't know what kind of intentionality they have built into that, and what kind of disruptive element you might be kind of getting. So as much as you might be like, oh, that's fascinating, that's a lovely piece of crystal, or skull, or offerings or whatever, just don't touch, or ask consent so check that you can. So I saw this sitting in the person's house for a good long while, but never asked about it, never touched it, because consent. And then a couple of years ago, they were like, actually, that's not mine. I don't like, I'm holding on to it. I was meant to hold on to it because it's supposed to go to somebody. But I didn't know who until they met me, or I got to the point in my growth and my practice where my relationship with Dagda had actually built up. Then they were like, actually, this is supposed to be in someone else's hand. And that's how it came to me. So, side story, just to make sure your clarifications brought in about what I'm actually holding, and it's something that I engage with him on Dagda over, and because one end is a rough end and the other end is a smooth end. So why am I talking about rough and smooth ends? I'm supposed to tell you a story. Here's me not telling you a story. Here's me talking around a story without actually telling you the story. So the tale that we have is called How the Dagda Got His Magic Staff. And it's a little bit tricky to know where the story kind of falls, but because a lot of them, a lot of these tales aren't they're not written in order. They come from multiple different books, multiple different kind of tomes, multiple different kind of periods. But the baseline of the story is that Lou, the god Lou in Ireland, I did a video on him, gets into a conflict with Kermit, a guy called Kermit Minibow, who is a son of the Dagda, one of the Dagda's children. And Lou slays him because Kermit had a tryst, or an intimate kind of experience with one of Lou's wives. The wife in question was Naas, whose name still is on one of the towns in Ireland in County Kildare, Naas. And so Kermit and her have a romantic tryst, that's how it is, but there is difficulty for Lou in accepting that, or culturally speaking, and so there's a conflict, and Lou wields the spear, Lugh is one of the four treasures of the Tuatha Dé Danann, and that, you know, it was said of this, sorry, said of the spear that no battle could be held against it. So Lugh takes the spear and Lugh kills Dagda's son with it. And so the story kind of picks up where the Dagda comes across his child, and his child has been slain by Lugh. And he finds his son Kermit killed, and it says then that he sets upon the body of his son all of his knowledge in Druidry, all of his knowledge in occult practices, and preserves the body from corruption. Interestingly enough, it actually says he uses frankincense and myrrh. So if anyone knows, like, their biblical stories, frankincense and myrrh were two of the gifts that were given to the child Christ, the child Jesus Christ, when he was born in Bethlehem to Mary. So the three kings came and brought these frankincense and myrrh. Anyone who knows about history will actually know that frankincense and myrrh aren't native to Ireland. They actually come from Africa. They're African resins. And so it's whether or not the story is linked in some way by latter kind of connection with Christianity, or whether this story actually shows that there was a broader kind of travel, a broader kind of connection. Because earlier tales in the Irish mythology does talk about the Tuatha Dé Danann when they leave their four great cities. Before they come into Ireland, they travel around. They travel around all of Europe, learning occult knowledge and wisdom, or hidden knowledge and power. So why would it say that they wouldn't come across traders or kind of people from Africa, or resins that came out of Africa from other people? So in essence, there's that, again, lovely reference, a lovely kind of part of it. But what we have here in the story is that the Dagda comes across his son is slain, and he can't do anything about it apart from preserve the body from corruption. But he doesn't leave it at that. Now, this is the god who, his name literally means you're good at everything. He can call upon the mountains to throw themselves against his enemies, call rain of fire from the sky, hide all of the water in Ireland from his foes. But he can't do anything against death. And so he decides, no, I'm not accepting that. And so he picks up the body of Kermit, which he's prevented from corruption, and it says he puts the body across his shoulders and leaves Ireland into the east. So he picks up the body. Now, Kermit isn't a kid. You know, Kermit's a grown-ass man. And so his dad kind of picks him up, puts his body over his shoulders. As much as, like, you know, the Dagda is a big god, he's still carrying a body with him, and he leaves Ireland. He doesn't go stay in Ireland. He knows that the only way to find what he needs is not in Ireland, and he goes out of Ireland, and it says he goes into the east. We don't have a direct place. It doesn't say, oh, he went specifically here, but it does say he traveled. He traveled for a while out of Ireland and into the east. And it was there that he came across three brothers. And the brothers were coming down the roads, having just taken up their inheritance from their father. And Dagda comes across him, and he's carrying the body of his child. And he's like, you know, well, what do you have there? And the three brothers like, well, we have our inheritance. And one is like, I have this shirt that allows me to kind of like change my shape. You know, one is like, I have this shield that, you know, allows me to kind of hide myself from my enemies. And the third one says, I have this club, which has a rough end and a gentle end. The rough end takes life, and the gentle end restores it. So at this point, Dagda, you know, grieving for the loss of his child, having, you know, done everything he could to within his own power, and looking for an option to do something to bring back his child, sees he has an opportunity. So he asks the brothers, can you place that staff upon my hand there, please? And they're like, yeah, okay. He's like, oh, give us a look at it. And so they hand it to him. And he's like, okay. And he takes the rough end and he kills the three of them. Says he places the rough end against the three brothers and slays them all straight away. Then he takes the gentle end, touches it to Kermit, and brings Kermit back. Now, it's murder. It's straight up murder. It really, really is. And there's one thing delving into the story and kind of trying to understand it more and trying to understand the God himself, the Father in that way, knowing what it's like to love people who I deem to be my children. Like, yeah, if anything were to happen to them, I can't say I wouldn't, step across lines that I normally wouldn't step across to do something to help them. But what's great about the story is the first thing that Kermit does when he comes back, when he's brought back to life, he kind of sits up, his life restored to him, and he sees the three bodies. And he's like, what happened? And Dagda's like, well, I found the power to bring you back. And Kermit kind of looks at his dad and calls him out. He says, why should I have life when it's been taken from them? Why do I deserve a life if they don't have a life? So Kermit shows an amazing character because he's just benefiting from this power personally. He's benefiting from this, circumstance. But he also sees that it's unjust and it's unfair that he should benefit at the cost of other people, that other people don't have access to the same benefit that he has received. And just because his dad is the one holding the power doesn't mean that, he doesn't call him out on it. And so the Dagda is called out on it straight away by Kermit when he comes back and he's like, it's not right, it's not just. And so the Dagda takes the gentle end and he restores life to the three brothers. Of course, they're pissed. It's like, whoa, what the hell did you do? And then Dagda kind of explains himself. It's like, this is the circumstance. I needed the power to restore my child, and there was no guarantee you were going to lend it to me or allow me to use it. And so I needed it. I needed the power over life and death. And the brothers are like, well, we're not too happy with that. And Dagda's like, okay, well, I actually still need to hold on to this club. And the brothers are like, well, that kind of leaves us imbalanced here because there was 3 items given to us as our inheritance and we're left with only 2 between the 3 of us. And Dad is like, okay, I will borrow the club. I won't take the club, I will borrow the club. And they're like, okay, well, how can we guarantee you're going to give the club back? And this is where we get another insight into the position and the power of the Dagda through his own words, actually. Because we have the Dagda talking about what he can do in the run-up to Moytura, and the other kind of deities like Nuada and Lu being like, yeah, peace out, you said you're going to do it, it's as good as done. We've seen Dagda moving the earth in his ditch digging for breasts. We've seen Dagda, bound by laws of hospitality and stuff like that. We've seen him in multiple different ways, but we've never exactly seen him talk about himself specifically and his abilities until this point. Because what he does is he offers as guarantee for the return of the club his power over land, sea, sky, sun, and moon. Essentially, he lists out the sun and moon, heavenly bodies, and his power over the land and the sea. So it's taken as a given that he wouldn't be able to offer that in promise of guarantee if he didn't have the authority to do so. But also, what's happening here isn't just that, yeah, sure, like I offer this generic guarantee. What he's doing is he's binding himself with an oath, because if he doesn't fulfill on his agreement, then his authority, his power over all of those things is gone. And so he takes it one step further, though. He doesn't just say, I'll lend me the staff and I guarantee my power against, the return of it. He also goes one step further and he says that I will only use the rough end against my enemies and the gentle end against my friends. I will bring death only to my enemies, and that I will bring life to those who are my friends. So he's not just saying that he's going to take the power and do whatever he wants with it. He takes the power, but he's only ever going to use it in certain circumstances, like those who are, friends, those who are close to him, those who are of his tribe, he will look after and he will restore. But he's not just going to straight away go around and just, hey, I can kill anyone with a single death touch of wood. It's only if they are his enemy. And from the cultural context, there's a couple of steps to be had before someone became an enemy. So, and also there were spaces like hospitality. Under the rule of hospitality, no one is an enemy. If you're both sharing space, even if outside of the brewer or outside of the night of hospitality is offered, if you kind of have generations worth of feud between bloodlines, if two people come together on a hospitality, there is no feud. It's neutral ground. So if you want to hear me talk about that, that's probably entirely other topics. Do let me know in the comments. But yeah, so we have this experience where Dagda then talks about his power. He talks about his his control, his authority over sun, moon, land, sea, sky, land and sea. But yeah, the whole sky element comes in the sun and the moon and the connection with over that. So he talks about his power in that way, and he offers that bond that if he were to break with it and not return the club, then his power is null and void. His power is gone. And so the brothers accept that, and they're like, "Yep, okay, grand, we accept it." And then the Dagda and Kermit return back to Ireland with his child restored and with taking up the power over life and death. So he has this whole new power over life and death. So it's an interesting story. It's a good story in many different ways because it gives us a greater insight into the Dagda and his relationship with his children. But is it a story about a magic stick? Is it a story about a magic club or stave? And this is where I need to take you back to that talk about translation. Because another translation for On Lorach Mór, more, again, as I said, is big, but it can also mean great. If something is great or grand, or also, the best of things, as in great in that context. Lorach, again, used for, staff or club. Euphemistically, it's also used for penis, which is where you get this whole kind of, well, yeah, he has a massive penis because on Lorach Mór, which again, from a cultural context, okay, let's put in a dick joke. It's a fun way of doing a thing within a story, but again, taken out of context, suddenly it's used to debase or demean or drive a caricature element onto the Dagda, which I have frustrations about, and I talk about John doing John rants, and the over characterization or the demeaning of deity, especially the Dagda, is one that really rankles me. If you're interested in hearing about that, shoot me a comment, and maybe I'll get around to that part. But there's one other translation for Lorach that really kind of hit with me, because again, I knew some of the stories. I knew stuff about the club, and I had to go figure it out. That's where, by delving into the translations of it myself, kind of reading over on the versions, and then taking the words and going and putting the Irish words in and kind of exploring about them, then I began to see a little bit more. Because one other translation for Lorach is actually example. And so my latest kind of exploration and mental kind of challenge, really, as I'm considering it and thinking about it, is what if the story isn't about the club at all? What if there is no club? What if the story isn't about On Lorach Mór, a big club or big staff, and it's actually Lorach Mór, a great example? Suddenly the story changes. Suddenly it's not about power. It's not about overcoming life and death. It's actually a story about fatherhood. It's about a story about being a parent who does everything within their own ability, and then goes outside of their own country, their own nation, their own culture to find anything else they can do for their child. That to me is something that seems right. And given that all of the stories, especially we know from the Irish lore and the Irish mythology, are teaching tales, there's always this element of the moral of the story is, be it don't fuck with the she, or don't kind of go here after dark, or, don't piss off a goddess of war, battle, prophecy, and bloodshed. There's always some moral of the story. So why is the moral of the story of how the Dagda got his club about life and death instead of how to be a good parent, a great example? So that is my tale for you. That is something that, again, I've been exploring myself in my own kind of relationship with the Dagda. The other things that we actually find is that that's the only, there's that reference to the club and this power over life and death. But there is one other reference to him dragging the club behind him as he moved to Ireland. And it was the track of the Dagda's club that made the provinces of Ireland and the counties and broke up Ireland into its pieces for rulership. But there's no other mention at all in the stories of him using the club to bring people back from the dead. There's literally just the one mention where he brings Kermit back from the dead. And there's another story, a story of Aid, which I might tell you at a different time. Aid is one of the other Dagda's children, and Aid is slain. But there's no mention in that story of him being brought back by a magic life and death-giving stick. And we know that story comes later on because the story about Aid, the Dagda's the king. And he's the king for 80 years after Lugh was king for 40 years. So there's a lot of kind of stuff that we can explore in these stories and in the lore, but it's important to understand that as much as we may be looking for literal experiences, literal locations, there is always going to be that cultural context. There's always going to be that, moral of the story, the message really that's trying to come through from the tale. And so, again, we know from the tales, from the belief structure, that there was, a club. One end was rough, one end was smooth, one end brought life and the other brought death. And that's what the story kind of tells us. But that's given a particular perspective and a particular translation. So why would it not be a tale about, being a healthy parent, about, doing whatever you do, moving the sun and the moon as far as you can to look after those who you are parent to, those who are children to you. Now, I don't just mean blood children here. For me personally, again, I always like to take that one step again and talk about personal experience with this and my personal relationship with Dagda. I don't have biological children, but I have children. I am a dad to children. I am a dad to people. I'm a non-blood uncle to so many people in this world, which I'm delighted of, and I'm very, very fond of. As much as I am a blood uncle to people who, are from my siblings. So it's not about genetics. It's not about the act of procreation. Someone could be a dad without doing the procreation element of it. It is about being that person who, looks after other people, the person who lives to the ideology of care, compassion, but also, protection and structure and discipline and doing whatever they can do to help make the life of those who come after them a better place, an easier place, or helps them to be the best versions of themselves they can be. So that's probably where I would finish off this tale and the story. I would like to say thank you very, very much. I'm very, very grateful for you being here with me, for turning up with our YouTube comments and hitting that bell for the notifications, doing the subscribe thing, because someone asked about the Dagda's Club, so I'm delighted to be able to provide an answer for us, and also to give a little bit more of my perspective as a Dagda Bard in this world. So look after yourself, and until the next time, take care. Remember, you're an awesome, beautiful person who deserves to be compassionate to themselves. All the best for now. Slán. Goodbye.